Hey kids, this is Evan. How you doing? It's amazing how many of the decisions we make in life, how many of our preferences and whatnot, they're not really based on logic. They're based on kind of like gut level visceral reactions. And I've noticed this in my children that people, I swear, people come out hardwired with a certain personality type and with certain preferences and certain visceral reactions. My children are 21 and 24 years old, both girls, and they have the same personalities now, which are very different from one another, that they did at 1 week old. I swear they came out hardwired. So it certainly has nothing to do with that. And speaking of preferences and gut level reactions and all that kind of stuff, check this out. I saw this other day and I got it today. This is badass. I have no problem, representing and wearing some Wonder Woman. In fact, I may have to get that denim jacket for men that's causing all that hubbub on the internet, with the Wonder Woman insignia on the back. Anyhow, this video has nothing to do with that, but I figured I'd represent and, be kind of cool. Anyhow, so this video is really about a game called The Pool and my reaction to it. And really more, it's talking like about visceral reactions to things and gaming preferences. Because I swear that, I think we come hardwired with what kind of games we're going to like. And then we discover them. Once we just discover this thing called the role-playing, this wonderful world, we end up gravitating towards things that kind of fit our bent anyhow. I really never thought about that in the past, but this is really starting to make more sense to me. And my reactions to this game are kind of telling. So let's dive right in. The pool, and I'm going to link the website where you can get the pool. It's like 4 pages long, really easy read. It's probably 1 page if you shrink down, make small margins and some small font. And I'm also going to link an essay about the pool by Ron Edwards, which is worth looking at. It kind of goes into a little bit more detail and has some charts on how the game actually works, the dynamics of the game and dice probabilities, which are important too. That's kind of a neat little thing. It's a very easy dice probability, by the way. And I'm also going to link a video, Ron Edwards talking about the pool and the implications it had for game design and whatnot. And that has where some of my reactions came from as well. So. Because I got introduced to this by a RPG study group I'm a part of, and somebody introduced us there, and I said, let's take a look at this particular video first, and then I was looking at the game. So anyway, I'll explain the pool to you as fast as I possibly can, and then get on to some of my reactions. So the pool was written by this guy James V. West in 2001. And it set, I guess, apparently the gaming world on its head because it did some things that nobody really thought of. At least nobody really had, any codified words for. And so I think it had more of an effect than he intended it to. So how the game works is this. You pick a genre, okay? Or you could have some kind of focus like, concept or idea or picture or whatnot, so everybody's kind of on the same page. At that point, everybody creates a character. And what they do is they write a 50-word story about their character. After that, they can assign some traits to their character based on the story. They can't contradict the story. They can't really expand too much on it. It's not like a cheat to get more words in the story by your traits, but they have to fit with it. And these traits do not necessarily have to have any dice assigned to them, but you can. If you want to assign dice to them, which means they're, when you are involved in an action or a conflict where this trait is relevant, then you get to roll dice. Well, you want to roll dice because otherwise you're SOL because you need to roll something for a success. Anyhow, you have to buy them. You start out the game with 15 dice in your pool, hence the name. And you can buy dice for your traits to assign to these traits on the basis of however many dice you want to assign to a trait. Well, you have to pay the square in dice for it. So in other words, if you want to assign 1 die to a trait, well, it costs you 1. If you want to assign 2 dice to a trait, it costs you 4. 3 dice to a trait, it's going to cost you 9. Okay, so they get, exponentially more expensive. So what happens next? During actual gameplay, the game master or the character can declare a conflict at any time. This doesn't necessarily have to mean adversarial, but there's something going on where there has, there's a need for success or failure in some way, shape, or form. And at that point, the player can decide, can roll dice. They can figure out like what trait would really apply to this, if any. And you're hoping at least one trait applies to it. Then you can, put it in your hand at this point. I don't really want to call it the pool, but in the hand of dice you're actually going to roll. You can place the number of dice assigned to that trait. So let's just say you have 2 to the relevant trait. Well, success is you need to get a 1 on at least one of these dice. And if you look at the graph on that commentary, you can see that with one die, your chances are like 1 in 6, which is not very good at all, 16.66%. Your chances, at low numbers of dice go up precipitously. It's like a sinusoidal curve, actually, is what it is. So the more dice you add at low levels, that greatly increases your chance of success by about 9 or 10 dice. Adding more dice onto that, while it's great, it doesn't produce as much of an effect. But you want to win, and there's a few reasons why, other than the fact that it's like, duh, you want to win. Okay. The other ways you can get dice is that the game master can give you gifted dice from 0 to 3. They don't have to. It's not a discussion. The game master, some ideas of why the game master might do that, but it's kind of a lot of times based on whim and how they're feeling. Whether they like your character, whether they feel like you need a break as a player, whether it fits the story, all this kind of stuff. But it's out of your control entirely. The only other way you get dice to roll is by gambling some of the dice that are left over in your pool. After you bought all your traits, assign dice to your traits. If you have any dice left over, you want to have some, let's say about 5. Okay, you can gamble dice from your pool. Should you fail to roll a 1 on any of these dice in your hand, then all the dice that you gambled from your pool, you lose. You get to keep, the GM gets his gift dice back, and you get to keep the dice, assigned to that trait. But the dice in your pool, they're gone at that point if you lose. So, what does success buy you? Other than the fact that, like, hooray, you succeeded at this, okay? You can choose at this point. It becomes a little game of strategy. I'll get back to the game of strategy shtick, at least for me, in a second. You can decide, hey, you know what I want to do? I want another die. And so you get this die for winning this roll. So you could add another die to your pool and increase the size of your pool, which means you have more dice to roll later on. Or you can assign these dice to traits, and I'll get back to that. At that point, though, then the game master narrates what the success looks like, and they're encouraged to do it in kind of a vanilla manner. If you fail, the game master narrates what that looks like as well. However, you can decide, I want to forego this bonus die that's going to go into my pool for winning this conflict. Instead, what I want to do is make a monologue of victory. And at this point, what happens is you have complete narrative control over what happens. And there's only a few real guidelines that James put in terms of what you ought to do. Don't make alterations to the characters of other players, like killing them. You can add complications, but not like real giant major alterations. Keep your narration in sync with the established facts and tone of the game. And if you need to ask like game master or other players questions, you can do that. Like in other words, if you say, okay, I make the prisoner tell me what he knows, well, the game master should supply, well, what does he know? Okay. And otherwise, like keep your narration reasonably short. As long as you do those 3 things, it's kosher. You do not have to have, the nod from the game master to say, yeah, that's okay. And you can introduce new people to the scene. You can do radical things. You have this monologue of what happens and what it looks like. You can, you have a lot of authority to change the reality of the game world at that particular time. It's all in your hands. And that's an important facet of this at this point. So after all that is said and done, with the dice you have in your pool, you can increase traits at any time. You can buy more dice for them. And I think it's assumed, at least I'm assuming, that it's still going to cost you a square. So if you want to increase a trait from 2 to 3, well, it's still going to cost you 9 dice to do that, as far as I can get. So anyhow, I digress. Let's go on. So it's advantageous to have dice in your pool, right? From a strategy point, it's advantageous because you have more dice to roll. But it's advantageous because you can boost your traits. You can boost them during the game or at the end of the game. At the end of a session, a couple things happen. Anybody that doesn't have at least 9 dice in their pool, or more, well, they get at least 9 dice at the start of the next session. If you've got like 15 or 18 dice in your pool at this point, you've won a lot of dice, you get to keep all those at the start of the next session. The other thing you get to do, this is important, is you get to add 15 more words to your character's story. And they don't necessarily have to all be things at the end. You can kind of go back, and if you're clever, you kind of do some editing by saying things like however, or formally, or all that kind of stuff, or used to. So you can kind of alter past reality a little bit if you look into this. So that's the game. And this kind of set the game world on its head, apparently. Now, I've got a couple off-the-cuff reactions. I'll give you the first one, and I'll give you the second one, which is much more telling. Now, the first off-the-cuff reaction would be, it's really easy to see how this game lends itself to like a narrativist game style. You really get to narrate, you get to do all kinds of story type stuff. which is cool, right? Um, or it's really also really easy to see how it lends itself to a gamist style, because it can be a real game of strategy. Like, do I make this big monologue of victory and get a lot of things that I want, or do I get this other die, which I can use later on to increase my pool, increase my traits, that sort of thing. How many dice do I put at risk? Am I willing to do that, and all that kind of stuff. And there's strategies that become evident. Really not a game that would support a simulationist style of play. You can use an inspiration to stick to a genre and a theme and kind of support it a little bit, but with a group of like-minded people. But it strikes me that the integrity of this game world is really vulnerable during the monologues of victory, because unless somebody has a real group of ardent simulationists, right, the cumulative effect of several monologues, or one really unabashed one, could significantly erode the fundamental consistency of the game world. And without any kind of game master editorial privilege, I suspect that simulationist foundation would intentionally or unintentionally be poked full of holes during the monologues to support things like the rule of cool, or to provide strategic advantage. At least that's what I would do. Okay, so I could see, over time, also that characters would kind of morph over time when you're adding those 15 words at the end of every session, to kind of give yourself some advantages as well. Be more interesting, maybe, or cooler, or more dramatic, or better suited to achieve particular goals. So you have to rewrite the past. So it's funny too. The pool sounds very interesting and novel. I am not knocking it. This is not what this video is about. But as it fails the simulationist litmus test, and as it looks like I'm really not that much of a narrativist when it comes right down to it, I instantly start thinking of the pool as a game of strategy. That was my first impression, but it gets much more interesting. My reactions get a lot more interesting. Around 43 minutes in the lecture, if you want to go check it out, Ron mentions the idea that for many of the people that want a game to produce a story, the idea of a game master is rather toxic to them, and they prefer to throw that concept out entirely. Not have a game master, and instead have everybody at the table have equal authority all the time. And then he says something really, really funny. You have to watch this because it's a hoot, the way he does it. He says something which I believe is absolutely correct, in my opinion, in my experience, is that what actually happens in a consensus situation is that one person kind of becomes the de facto game master via the fact that they're the pushiest. Maybe they're passive aggressive. Maybe they just have the strongest force of will. And so, even though it's not really said, everybody kind of, maybe understands they're really kind of running the show, or they have more authority over the game world reality than everybody else. So Ron goes on at this point to explain what the pool actually does is to codify the shifts in authority from the game master to players during particular times. And this is the first game that ever did that. I mean, they were thinking about things like this, but they never really had the words for it. And there were times when I didn't really have the words for expressing myself. And kind of hold that in your mind too. But he talked about the 4 types of authority, at least to him, and it's a useful starting point. It's another model, so take it for what it is. But he talked about the idea of authority over the situation, okay, which you usually don't normally think of as a game master authority. Authority over the backstory, which part of that's the players and their individual backstory, right? But also part of it is in terms of the game master authority over the world. And also, you think of it, well, your backstory is your backstory. You can't really change that, right? Once it's set down, okay. Then he talks about the other kinds of authority, which are a little bit more obvious, the authority over the outcomes, which are kind of like, many times, it's the dice and probably in a lot of classic games, the game master, where they decide, well, this is what the outcome is. And then authority over the narration, which depending on your play style or, how you grew up, it could be, game master, or a bit of player, a little bit of both. But those are the 4 basic types of authority. And so this game really codifies those shifts in authority. And it seems to me, as I'm listening to all this, that the monologues of victory can provide player authority, a great deal of player of authority over 3 of those. It can provide you a lot of authority over the situation or the setting, because you're free to alter things in terms of this person shows up, or what's in the next room is this. It even gives examples right there in the game. That's what you can do. So you have all of a sudden the player has authority over the situation and the setting. Second thing is they have authority over the outcomes. Like, yes, I won, but what did that, exactly what did I win? How did that happen? How much did I get? In whatever conflict or situation it might be. And then it gives them complete authority over the narration. They can narrate, their little heads off about how everything goes. So it gives them a lot, and also it gives them a lot of authority over those three domains right at the back. And the other thing I was thinking of, and I've kind of alluded to it, is by putting those extra 15 words in at the end, if you're clever, you can have a lot of authority over the backstory. And you can change your character's backstory, like I said earlier, to make it more advantageous and to kind of set yourself up to be either cooler, or better suited towards achieving whatever goal it is your character has, And remember, like for me, I'm going to the default gamist mode at this point because it's really not a simulationist, the game that supports simulationism very much. So that's instantly where my mind is going. So what I found really interesting at that point was my reaction because, until really recently, last year or so, I really lacked the vocabulary to express my instincts and preferences when it came to gaming. So I really didn't think about it all that much. And, I'm afraid to say that, I was a little impolite many years ago, and I would have discussions with people, and they would mention a game like the pool or something that was really just outside of my experience or preference. And I'd say things like, "You're freaking kidding me? That's, crazy," because it just didn't make any sense to me. I like to think I'd mellowed out and become much more open-minded now. But now I have some vocabulary. And what I noticed, though, is unlike the people that Ron describes at that 43-minute mark, I have no problem with a final authority resting with a single person in a game. In fact, I prefer it. And, what I mean by that is, when he talks about a monologue of victory not requiring a nod from the game master, say, yeah, that stands, okay, that's all right, it instantly makes me a little uneasy. And I'll tell you what, I like a game world to be consistent, internally consistent, and instinctively, I want there to be a single point of accountability. And, somebody who has editorial power. And of course, if the person's a jerk, the game master's a jerk, well, I simply don't play with them. So that's problem solved. We're not talking about that kind of, that guy. But I want somebody, like a single point where it says, okay, these are how the laws of physics work. This is, what's true in this particular game world. This is reality. I like the game master to kind of play reality in one way or another. But I'm laughing at myself at this point, as I'm thinking about all this, because I realize that, while I'll roll my eyes at somebody, sometimes a bit, I try to be nicer now, when they complain that they simply cannot trust a game master with that much authority, I'm having trouble wrapping my mind around trusting a group of people who all essentially have equal authority over the game world reality, not by consensus, but that, any one of them can win a monologue of victory and wrest that reality. And what I'm having problems trusting them to do, in my little, hypothetical thought experiment, is to maintain a reality that's entirely consistent. Isn't that funny? So gaming styles really seem to be kind of visceral reactions to a degree. So I wonder, after all this, kind of a long video, but what are reactions to stuff like that? I've noticed people having very visceral reactions to an overly, games that are very gamist or very simulationist, and or very narrativist, or just very, very different styles of play. And sometimes even without giving it a lot of thought, we tend to just have this real gut level reaction, yes or no. And I guess now I like to be able to have this a little bit more of a vocabulary, a little bit more of a dialogue to understand why I like what I like and why I don't like what I don't like. Not that it's bad, it just doesn't jive with my gut level reactions. But Wonder Woman shirts, they do. So I'd love to hear your opinion.